Are you a church leader trying to navigate the tension of doing ministry both online and in person? Welcome to the Bricks and Clicks Church Leadership Podcast, a podcast where church leaders and ministry experts share ideas, solutions, and experiences about making church work both in person and online. Meet the hosts of Bricks and Clicks, a Brit and an Aussie who became friends in their efforts of making churches irresistible. Duncan Banks lives just outside London, England, and Jason Perkins lives in Brisbane, Australia. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Banksy and Perko.
Very practically, one of the best ways I found with launching online groups is you, the pastor, get together your core leadership team. If it's 3, if it's 10 people, and do an online group for 3 weeks. Actually do it yourself for 3 weeks. So do multiplication, do the discipleship. You know, the whole idea is that Christianity started in Jerusalem and went out. You know what I mean? And so, and if you see what that looks like, you got to watch Dave's videos. He's some of the videos in the Middle East out there. And so, but like that the concept there is very simple. Do it for 3 weeks. And then at the end of it, if you did it with 10 of your key leaders, now you got 10 people ready to launch 10 online groups at your church. So model it and then do it. And I think it's trying to explain the internet to people, or like, I'll take a better example. If you try to explain Reddit to somebody, why does Reddit exist? A stranger might go, that seems weird. But until you actually get on it and you see its usefulness and I get it. I think launching those. And so for us, you know, very early, we had, you know, tens of thousands of people, but we had hundreds of online groups. And right now we have over 1,900 groups part of the online campus alone. And, wow. And 60% of those actually meet in homes, 40% meet online, because we also have a strategy of moving online to face-to-face over a course of 2 years. So that's a little bit of a kind of painting a broad picture, but that's what I would do.
So, dude, Jay, you've said so much there. You've unpacked so many things, and I like how you dropped. I because we've spoken so many times before, I knew the size of your small group ministry from online, but I loved watching Perko and Duncan's reaction. And I know some people will listen to this on a podcast and you won't see it, but it was kind of like a movie. It was kind of like a cartoon, you know, when the guy's jaw drops and the eyeballs come out of their head. That's exactly what it looked like if you're listening to this on the podcast. So I know that they've probably got some questions around that, but before I get to that, I want to ask you this question specifically around the groups. Well, it's not specifically around the groups, but it has to deal with the groups, I suppose. I know, you know, I've been doing online ministry since 2008, and the question that I got constantly then and to this day, like literally this morning, I got the question, and I know you know what it's going to be. You know, we're told in Hebrews 10:25, Jay, that we should not give up meeting together. So how can you have online groups when you know, Hebrews tells us that we should meet together? What is your answer to that question? Because I know people are thinking it right now if they aren't already asking it.
Yeah, so the big way I would reply to that would be that this is not the end of the yellow brick road. I mean, you know, like this isn't the end in mind type of, you're not trying to keep them digitally. What you're trying to do is you're trying to produce or create a new on-ramp for people to experience. It's something that's very big in the marketplace is people want a self-service model. They want to be able to try out your product, review your product, go deep before they ever make a full commitment. This is the 30-day trial type of model. You know, in some cases, I don't even want to put up a credit card before I make the commitment. And a lot of times what people realize is that people are not growing up, you know, especially in California. I've known this for my entire childhood. People don't grow up going to church in California. It's just not a natural thing. And so the idea is that we get to go to them, but what's important is that they want to experience you beyond just streaming. They want to actually try it on. And I found online groups are a great way to kind of introduce that and provide deeper community. And it should be classes and different things, but it's much more than just a stream. But I see it as a starting point. It's the idea of Jesus going and having, you know, meeting somebody on a road and talking to them. He's not saying you're going to stay on that road. He's bringing you back into community. And so I just see this as an opportunity to kind of bring them in and disciple them up. What I found even with online groups, people will come to me constantly and will go, hey, Jay, I've been part of your online community for the last year and a half. You know what? I found a church down the street. I think I'm going to join it. That thing. And I'm like, I'm excited. And they don't realize that they've matured over that they've had some spiritual maturity, because maybe they didn't go to that church because they didn't like the music or the pastor did this or that. and now they've kind of been trained up. The other thing I would just really encourage them on is that you know, and I want to say this lightly because I know there's a lot of theological implications here, is that, you know, don't limit what's possible just because it's not its full expression. So sometimes what we do is we like to put God in a box where church can only happen this way. And so what we're defining it as 4 walls, a stage, pews, etc. And you're saying that all these other things isn't church, you know? And I would like, I always call it the thief on the cross, that the thief on the cross somehow crossed a eternity without God, with God. There's a minimal line that he crossed essentially to be in paradise with Jesus. Now, nobody strives to be the thief on the cross. So you got to strive to be Paul and obviously like Jesus. But what you can't do is you can't belittle what the thief on the cross did. And if there's some minimal expression, you can't throw it all out. And I think there is church happening online, and it is an expression of church. Now, you can argue that it may not be the fullest expression, which I would go, I understand that. But I do think technology is going to challenge that in the next 10 years for sure.
Yeah, dude, there was so much I loved about what you just said. And I want to pick up on part of it. You called out, it is not the end of the yellow brick road. This is exactly how I answer it as well. And quite frankly, my theology, my philosophy around this has shifted dramatically since 2008, because back then I thought maybe it is the end of the road. But what I've realized is that we can leverage it, as you said, as an on-ramp into actual physical community for people, because in the same way that California is set up, people don't grow up going to church. I'm from Australia, Perko's from Australia, and I know in England where Duncan is as well, it's exactly the same thing. We're in this post-Christian world where going to church is not natural. So trialing it out and giving that option is so important. In fact, we did a similar thing at North Point a couple of years ago of trialing what we called city groups, where, you know, we used technology to figure out there are a bunch of, it started with in Anchorage, Alaska, quite frankly, where we had something like 95 URLs from Anchorage, Alaska, which isn't a big town. So I leveraged social media to start connecting people in Anchorage, Alaska to each other. And then over the course of the next 6 weeks, we got down to 45 URLs. And most people were like, oh my gosh, people aren't watching. And what I was like, no, this is a win, because people are now watching together from the same URL. So they're actually getting into physical community. And that's one way you can leverage technology. When I get hit with that, Hebrews 10 question, I always say it's not a Hebrews 10 issue, it's a Mark 16 issue, because in Mark 16:15, Jesus says, go into all the world and preach the good news. And going into all the world includes going into Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all of those places, because that's a big part of it. But with the caveat of it being, this is not the end of the road, it's the beginning, it's the on-ramp to the road. So Jay, thank you so much for unpacking that. That is such a great thing. I want to throw it over to Duncan. I know you've got a couple of questions.
I've got 2 questions, Jay. Lots of our pastors are beginning to realize that they're going to need to take online a lot more seriously than they did. So they're thinking about employing people. And so seeing as you and Dave aren't available on the salaries they're prepared to offer,
are they looking for a chief meme officer at their church? Is that what you're talking about, Dunk?
Yeah, who likes Bud Light. Yeah. So I'd love to pick your brains, Jay, about exactly what your job description is. And if you were a church of, 200 or 300 people, 400 or 500 people, what would you look for in someone you were employing to be the online pastor? But just before you answer that, can I just dive back into this small groups question and take you right back to it? I love what you were saying about, in a sense, digital community is pseudo community, it's community light, and in many ways it's there to drive people into physical community. I love that, so powerful. But I've always found in church that often what we do is people will come along to a Sunday service, whether it's in the room or whether someone shared a link on YouTube, and they'll watch it, and then suddenly the next step is massive. I've sat and listened to the pastor preach and sang a few songs, and now he's telling me I've got to join a group. Wow, that's a big next step. I'm not into that. what have you done at Saddleback? Is there any, how do you get people into these groups, especially new people? Is there any smaller steps do you know what I mean? To that big step of actually joining a group? How do you make it easier for people?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point where one thing I will say is that ultimately online will amplify what you're doing. So at the end of the day, even I could come into any church in any size, and I'm just going to amplify what's being talked about from the pulpit. And so you can amplify your strengths and your weaknesses. So it's not going to fix your methodology or your discipleship pathline. It's going to put a megaphone to it. And so I think some of those things, a lot of times when somebody asks me about how do you have groups, or and I go, well, my pastor, my church, we're a church of groups. Like that's, so what I've done is I'm kind of like a good marketer that I've like, I always joke, I don't create the wave. I'm just efficiently riding the wave. That's what I do. I just get better at it. And so I think what's important is that you got to figure out some of those things. And I think a lot of churches do need to have real conversations around, they're kind of like, here in the States, we have something called, it might not be a thing, but as a kid, they had the penny saver, where you have a newspaper and has all these little ads, and it's just like overwhelming. And a lot of websites and YouTube channels and services are like the penny saver. It's like a buffet. And really you need to have more clarity on what's the simple next step, or what are the 2 next steps? Because when you talk about less, you get more people. And this is true. One of the things I learned becoming an online pastor, my pastor has long forms and cards. And one of the things is, if you're filling out a card at a worship center, like you're in a building during church, you're more likely to complete more because you have time, you're filling it out. By filling out a digital form, there's only so many scrolls till you're like, forget it. And so we found we have to reduce it down. Once you get beyond 5, I think HubSpot has a stat. After 5 questions or after 5 points in a form, you start losing 25% with every extra thing. And so you need to become more simple. But on the question particular on the group, I will say that 2 things we do at a high level. We do invite them to be part of our community in 2 ways. Initially, it's kind of stay up to date, which is nothing revolutionary here. It's just a newsletter, so that the ask is really just to figure out, like, get continual updates so you don't forget about us. The second thing is we use a Facebook group, and the idea is we use that kind of like a digital patio where people can connect with each other. And what I love about that, and I love Facebook, I love the tool, I'm not dependent on it. I think we would move with wherever it is, but I wanted a place for people to connect with each other. So I get questions all the time, like Dave, it's like, hey, I'm watching here, is there anybody? And our Facebook group has been a place where people can kind of share and interact. So one of the most natural steps is actually get in and actually get regular updates what we're doing. So you can still kind of sit in the back row at your church. And so you'll kind of see that, and then get in the Facebook group. The other thing I will say that we do is we make the ask very simple so they don't have to commit. So the idea is that if you're interested in getting into a group or hosting a group with some of your friends, hey, just text us or email us here. And what we're doing is we're not trying to lock them in. I just want the option to get the people that are interested so I could retarget those people. So I think too many people say, hey, fill out this form. I need your time. I need all these things, where they don't have those answers. They haven't talked to anybody yet. So I would much rather have 100 people that are interested than 30 vetted. And what I can do with the 100 is I can send something to those 100, and then let's say 70 don't sign up from that. Then I could retarget those who don't sign up. So I think those are 2 things we do.
See, that's genius right there. That is worth listening to this podcast or tuning in tonight. The small step of just the pastor saying, I hope you've enjoyed being with you. I write to the church just 2 or 3 paragraphs every week, and I'd love to keep you up to date with everything we're doing around here. So if you've enjoyed today and you want to keep up to date, just drop us your email. And then it's in the email that you can start making the ask. And don't make an ask to say, join our 24-month group, join our 2-week group or our 1 gathering. I love those simple steps. Really, really cool. And just pushing the conversation on a little bit further than Jay, and then I'm kind of done here. What is your job description? What would you suggest? A church of 300, 400, 500 people who are realizing they need to put more dollars, more pounds, more energy towards the digital thing. And what we do is we want to improve our kids' work. We employ a kids director. We want to improve our youth work, our student ministry. We employ a youth director. So we're all wanting to employ a digital pastor. But what's the job description for that? What would you suggest is
Jay,
who are we looking for?
Before you answer that, Jay, I just got to point out, Duncan, you asked him that question at first. What is your job description? almost like the finance committee member at the church. Like, what does that online pastor do anyway? Is he just on Instagram all day and taking selfies? I tell you what, he spends a lot of time at the cafe shooting pictures of his coffee.
I just mine Bitcoin. That's all I do. I mine Bitcoin.
That's brilliant.
That's all I do.
And then he puts an expenses claim in for the new
iPhone.
I
do. And they're like, what is this long URL? Like, why is this key? This is weird. This is like dark web. No, so first off, it all depends on where you positionally like put him, like, or him or her, like, in the organization, because there's a lot of ways to make this work. I think one thing, a church needs to have a real conversation around, do you want people far away to be members or core attenders of your church? And if you don't, that's okay. But if you do, then you need to really explore a remote or distant type of pastor. I think a lot of people should start as a digital or online pastor, as somebody who amplifies the existing ministry that you're doing locally. And so what I mean by that is, I very much see my job at most churches would probably be, I'm over the digital pastoral experience of our church. And so that means I'm kind of owning the product of streaming. Doesn't mean I'm over the actual content or any of those things. I'm like the digital concierge. I'm making sure there's no gap. I'm making sure if the text number or the email align and the people are following it up. And then I'm thinking through how to connect the watcher into our physical presence. And so I think that's where most of it is. And then I'm over also online groups. Now we're in a weird moment at COVID where our church, just like a lot of churches, and I bet Dave's churches, we're having a lot of conversations of what is the role of online when all of us are online and so we're a multi-site strategy, which I do think multi-site does bring in some unique challenges with digital that you really have to have some big questions around, which we're wrestling through. And so for us, I very much so see, I think one of my giftings, and I think anybody that's in a role like this has to do, is that you don't have to be an expert in everything digital. You don't have to be a coder, but you need to have a grasp. You need a little bit, not like a Renaissance grasp, but just a little bit of an understanding. And then you need to be pastoral. And I think it's actually the sitting in between those is really helpful, because ultimately I know my church's strategy of how we develop people. I understand the technology and I know what my pastor wants at the end of the day, and figuring out how to bridge those. So I see that digitally, that every way people experience is digitally, I want to somehow connect them to something long-term. And I would encourage a church of any size, this is not about full-time, part-time, pay, unpaid type of thing. You have digital experts that are doing this in your community. Either they're in their youth or they have a business that they're killing it. And at the very bottom line, empower a digital volunteer that can at least be in all your conversations to help speak that language and smooth out the gaps. I think that's what I would do. Even if I was a church at 50, I would say, who's the sharpest person with digital? Kind of look at their accounts and just kind of see, I need you to be my digital lead, and start including them in conversation. So when you go to do stuff, they should always have a sit at the table. And as your church grows, obviously that can be more of a permanent role.
That's so good, great. Jay.
I've got another question, because Jay keeps mentioning this word text, and it suddenly dawned on me the other day that we as a family, we watch church online, but we all gather around the big screen. So when the church is asking us to interact, it's really hard because it's on the big screen. And then I've watched your church a few times, Jay, and you often ask people to text. So if you can do an online collection, an offering, text give and the amount you want to give to 8131, or you want to join one of our two-month groups, text group to 8131. And so everybody, instead of the one person who we're looking at, because I can't text because I'm watching it on my machine here. But if everyone's got a phone and everyone can text, everyone who's sat on the sofa can respond and interact. So I think that's new thinking for some of our churches. Yeah. How do you use text as a way of getting people to being more engaged?
Yeah, and I think Dave and his church have been doing this a lot longer. But I know for us, one of the things that I realized a while ago was this idea that we create all these killer designs on our YouTube and our Facebook and even our website, and most people just go full screen, or they're casting it up to their TV. And the thought is that people are not watching, and they're not seeing all the next steps, your navigation. They're not looking at the link in your description. When they're done, they just exit out. And so, and what's important is like, if you have a form on your website, you're right. What is each family member going to load it up, or if they're all on a computer, are they going to reload as they submit the forms? Texting is such a powerful, just simple step. And I think actually texting gets out of that. There's one word and there's one step usually associated with it, which is really key. It's really important. Now, I do think it introduces some new problems. Like, for example, one of the things, talking to our pastor over kind of first steps, he said pre-COVID, he was talking about pre-COVID, he would get hundreds of first-time guests. And he told me, he's like, hey, nobody's filling out this form and no one's checking this box. And I was like, yeah, because no one's filling out that form. Everybody's texting. And so one of the things, this is a small thing we talked about. I said, honestly, I think you need to shift your metric. It's no longer about how many people check that box, but how many new numbers are from those text numbers based off your database. And those are the things where you kind of, again, you're smoothing out the gaps. You're figuring out, what has to make sense. But texting has been a huge thing for us. So I don't know, Dave, I know you guys have been doing it for longer than us, I feel like, on a larger scale.
Yeah, we do. So we've been using a whole bunch of different things, but most often during a Sunday service, it will be text, 131313, and it'll be a one-word thing, because we're trying to keep that as low key as possible. And the reason for that is it doesn't matter if people are watching full screen or if they're sitting in a physical building. This is the thing that they still have in their hands at that moment. So if we can get them to leverage that, then it's a lot easier. And having a simple text number like 131313, for argument's sake, it's just easy to remember and do right there in that moment. And often what our pastor Andy Stanley will say is, I want you to get your phone out right now. And he'll make a joke about it. Get your phone out right now. I know 60% of you have got it out anyway, but we just want you to text volunteer to 131313. And that's when we start to get that we start to get inundated with those phone numbers and those forms getting filled out, as you said, Jay. And I would go one step further. I honestly think, and I might have said this to Duncan and Jason before, but I honestly think this is the most intimate device that we have. Somebody texting me, email has a very low open rate, like in the 20% at the very best. Texting has a 99% open rate, because if you can text back to your church, like how many people avoid text messages? I mean, we still read them, even if we don't get back to the person we said we're going to get back to, right? We still read them all the time. And so I've been leveraging this as a platform for a long time now, especially like through my Instagram. I will ask people, hey, if you need prayer today and you don't want to put it in a comment because it's private, text me. Here's my phone number. And I give out my number, but there are apps that you can leverage. You can have a Google phone number. If you've got a Google Gmail, you can get a Google phone number completely free, and it does exactly the same sort of thing. You don't have to have any special apps, and it's just free. All you have to do is keep it active. So I think you have to text like once every 100 days. So that's even you texting yourself from your phone to your Google phone number just to make sure that it stays active. I've also tried out Superphone and Community. The Community app is what I'm currently using. Now they're a little bit more expensive, but it's a great way to stay connected, because then you're carrying your church around in your pocket. You can do that 24/7. You can do it, 7 days a week. I would suggest don't do it 24, because then it gets weird, but at least do it on a regular basis.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, quick question, Dave, from somebody here down in Australia. Does the Google phone thing work in Australia? Do you know the Google phone number? Does it work internationally?
I think what Google will do for you in Australia is give you an Australian phone number. Yeah. So instead of it being a 201 number like here, it'll be a, I forget how phones start.
0499 or whatever, because it's probably a mobile one. Yeah. Probably. Yeah. Hey, real quick, Jay, couple of frustrations that I'd love for you to address, if you wouldn't mind.
I'm so good at frustrations, my wife would say. So let's do it.
Okay, awesome.
That's why he's got the red backing light, because he knows
exactly the red backlight.
I give the different colors if I want to be in the meeting or not, just to let you know.
Nice. Red, yellow, green light people. I love it. I've got to move. I've got to move my bookshelves now and get a light behind them. I got to do it. It's going to be done today. Real quick, Jay, a frustration of some online pastors, or even that. I love the fact that you talk about, hey, get a volunteer in your church that's great with digital. can I just be honest really quickly? Some of the content that maybe pastors are creating is not conducive for digital, if we're just being totally honest. So how do you navigate that conversation? If you could have a very blunt conversation, your lead pastor's not listening to this, Jay. He's not logged in, I'm sure. But if you could have a blunt conversation, what would you say to a pastor to say, hey, here are some key things, guys. When you're trying to create content for the digital space, could you please keep this in mind so that it's more conducive to what we're talking about? Said no digital person to their pastor ever.
Yeah, this is a collective learning from many amazing people in churches, where just the realization that more people are watching you on video than they are in the room. I mean, the power, I always think of this as the audiences, where, you know, when I went to seminary, I was taught to preach to the people in the room. You know, that was the idea. I mean, I literally had a preaching class, and that was, you know, we would practice in like a hall kind of setting. But now what you have is you have three. You have people live in the room, you have people watching live online, and then you have people watching days, months, years later on YouTube. And you want to make sure all three take a spiritual next step. And we have this ability to kind of capture that moment in time. And I think it's really important. And I was reading something a couple months ago, and they were talking about, it was this funny moment between, I think it was Charles Wesley and George Whitefield. And there was this conversation around, Charles Wesley was told by George Whitefield to go preach out in the public. And George Whitefield, from his background, he thought you only can speak the word of God inside of a holy sanctuary. He literally thought it was like unsanctified to leave the building. And after a day or so, you can actually read some of Charles Wesley's journals. He literally thought it was vile, like it was dishonoring to the Bible to do that. And he did it a couple times under George Whitefield's like coaching. And he was like, oh my goodness, how wrong I am. And I think the same thing's true now with like thinking about it being online, thinking about an audience beyond. So I would tell Charles Wesley, it's not just those who are live outside, it's also those who are watching it on video later. So I just think the audience is bigger, and you can scale the content and disciple people. And I think one of the most undervalued things about capturing your content in various different ways, video, audio, so forth, is that you can just scale it, and your time is so limited, and there's so many things. And so I would very much have that conversation. And then I would lean into the importance, and I'm speaking Dave's language here. I would talk about the importance of creating native content for the platforms and not reposting things. Now, I think that if you get the right person who is good at what they do, there are ways to package up content for the house or inside the building that could go online. You know, you see this on Instagram. Well, what they'll do is they'll create like a graphic template, and they'll put the video and they'll put words over it. I think there are things you can creatively do to spice it up and make it. But I really want to challenge people is that you can reach so many more people. And the last thing I will say is you just got to make a decision. If you want to primarily minister to people in the building, meaning that's what you want to do, or do you want to reach more people? And honestly, that's a decision for your church. And I've seen both work digitally. I've seen people who preach just to the room, and it works online, but then they do things to kind of enhance it. So it's not about you have to do it. I think it comes down to your calling and what your church wants to do. And I want to encourage, there's a lot of churches of all certain sizes that what you'll find, and I've seen this with a lot of churches that are international, what will happen is they'll stream their services in Arabic or Farsi or some other language, and they'll get people all around the world, because what you'll find is those people have moved all around the world and they don't have a local church. And so they want to tune in. And the same thing's true with your subculture of the church. There are people that want your pastor, and overnight you can just reach so many more people.
So can I just drill down on this a little bit, Jay? Are you saying, because we're all thinking about life after lockdown, we're all thinking about when our churches will be opened again. And now we've got to hold the bricks and the clicks together. We're going to hold the digital and the physical together. So are you saying you have to tailor the content for various platforms? So you're saying if I'm the preacher on Sunday morning, I've got to think about preaching a style and a sermon to the people that have gathered in the room to listen to me, and then I've got to do something separate to preach to YouTube, and then something separate for Facebook? How do we package up, Or do we, because, you know, live streaming, do we just put a camera at the back and stream it? Or do we package it up differently?
I would definitely not just put a camera in the back and stream it. I think you need to be conscious of what's going on there, both in the audio mixing and who's on camera and so forth. I mean, there needs to be more thought about how you're framed. You know, you're gonna have a wide shot, a tight shot, and what's behind you, all those things. And I would encourage, I don't think every church needs to do this. First off, you don't need to do this immediately. I think what's important, that if you're gonna turn on that camera and you're gonna say we're in, you need to treat that as a true venue or a true location in the quality. You need to understand what they're seeing. And so, for example, I think a lot of churches, one of the things you can do is you can preach to the live audience, but you're going to have to move the camera to a location in your building that might disrupt seating. Like a lot of churches, one of the number one things I see, they put their camera on the empty balcony pointing down. Like,
there's a reason.
You have
there's a reason no one's sitting up there.
Yes, exactly. And it's like this weird shot. And you see that you need to put it, like at our church, we have, and our pastor and our video team embraced this a long time ago. We actually have the stage elevated. They built the stage super high. And then what they have is they have cameras in the back of when we're on the floor. And there are a couple seats where you are blocked from the stage. And a lot of churches don't want to do that. They're valuing that real estate of those like 5 chairs over the potential of online. And so I think if you're going to turn it on, you got to think about all that, and you got to make it a priority. You got to think about the experience, but then still preach. For example, the first part would be embrace that, and then still preach to the room. But when you get to next steps, just for a moment, look at the camera and just go, hey, so you say, hey, everybody sitting here, you know, in front of you, there's this next step card filled out. And those watching online, I want to encourage you right now, you know, text us or do this. Just take moments throughout to do it. The next level would be creating content just for the stream. And I think that takes investment. That it's something like, oh, once you see it working, maybe you will preach 2 sermons or produce 2 things. I think there are a lot of churches now having this question: Are we gonna continue this online only type of experience? We're gonna go back to capturing the room. And I see pros and cons to all of it. I think we're leaning towards maybe doing that, but it comes down to investment. But I would start with, make it treat it like a location, think about the quality, have somebody think about all that stuff, potentially put the camera somewhere where you might lose some seats, but you're going to reach more people, and then just turn to the camera a couple times and say, hey, thanks for watching, or hey, you take a next step. I think that's an introductory way to think about it.
And Dave and Jason know this of me, because this is my little pet peeve, really, listening to lots of pastors, whether they're in person or whether it's online, is they always get to the end of the service or the end of their message and they say, thanks so much for being here. Can't wait to see you again next week. And that's it. Church is shut now for 7 days until 10:30 next Sunday morning. And I've just been pleading with pastors to say, you know, we live online and we'd love to have a conversation with you there. Join us. You know, thanks for being part of what we're doing today. Join us for the rest of the week. And then up on the screen comes your Facebook, your Instagram. And it's such a simple thing, but it involves everybody, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's such an easy thing when churches, you know, are able to meet again inside the building, and you know, obviously there's some theological things around that, because the church, what we call the building, the church is actually the people who meet in that building. So let's just put that aside. But it's so easy for you to say, even when you're preaching from a stage, to people in the room and having cameras up the back, thank you so much for being part of our church today. That encapsulates everybody. Yeah. Whether they're watching online, whether they're listening on podcasts during the week. Hey, thank you so much for being part of our church today. We look forward to catching up with you more online and during the week. It's a simple little shift. It doesn't take any extra time. It just has to become a habit of understanding that, let's be real, the reality is, in the modern day world, more people are going to be listening on podcast or watching that message on YouTube than are in the room, because it's going to last a lot longer. And so you have to allow for that. But as pastors, as people, like all 4 of us give messages, right? We love having somebody in the room. who's responding to us live. And so it's so easy for us to only cater to that audience. This is where I think YouTubers have the leg up on us. And this is part of the reason why I've poured so much of my time into YouTube, is to understand that mentality of my audience is much bigger if I'm specifically focused on that online crowd. And as Jay said, starting to treat that like it's the house, like it's the church building. If we treat that camera like the people who are watching this a year from now, they're still part of this whole thing. I think that's such great advice.
Well, and I think it's just like, if anybody's been on a Zoom call, you know, the difference between somebody looking at the camera or looking at the screen, it's just a simple thing, you know, like, hey, why aren't you now, even for us, depending where the camera is, like I'm using an external camera, so I have to look here, and those are simple. So I'm not looking at you guys. And I think that's a simple, do you like people on Zoom calls looking at you or not looking at you? And you know, it's awkward if they're not looking at the camera. And again, this is a skill set we're all having to embrace in this moment. But I think small things like that add a ton of value. And that's why honestly, for most churches, it's having a separate feed where it's just for online, and having a host is so valuable, because you don't have to necessarily change too much of the dynamic inside the building. You can then have a separate setup. And, you know, something like, and I love how Dave does this, is it's just like, hey, thanks for watching online this week. You know, my name's Jay. I'm the online pastor. I'm here to help you take your next step, and I would love to meet you. And so, you know, and I just kind of set the table for what they're about to do, and we kind of throw to it, and then we close it. And again, you can get super creative or super low tech. There's a lot of simple ways to do that.
Hey, Jay, we're running close to the end of our time here, but man, I've got one last frustration I'd love for you to help with, if you wouldn't mind. I feel like this is like digital pastor counseling we're going through right now. It's so good. So good. So my frustration is this, and I think it's actually one, well, I know it's one that I've heard from a lot of people. We started this whole thing back in March, let's call it. Everyone's excited. We're online. We're watching faithfully, all that kind of stuff. And then whammo, like our numbers of our regular attenders start tanking, to be honest. You know, and let's be frank, even the pastors that are watching this are like, man, Sunday mornings are so nice now. It's just a game changer. And we don't necessarily want to go back to what our Sunday mornings used to be, even those of us in full-time ministry. And yet we want our people that are regular attenders to be engaging with our content. And so the question or the frustration is this. We've talked a lot on this call, and I'm so glad we have, about engaging people and maybe even using online as the on-ramp or the front door, and how to take easy next steps. I love that. What about our regular attender? How do we re-engage them? I guess that's my question, is what would you suggest to those of us that are a bit frustrated with engagement of our regular attenders right now? How do we re-engage them?
Yeah, we had a weird couple weeks there where you had COVID hit the world, and you know, you had this global pandemic where everybody wanted to hear how your pastor was going to respond, or your church was going to respond. And then you had Easter, one of the most visited weeks of the year, where somebody's and so you had two injections of momentum that just kind of probably blew the socks off of everybody. You know, even the most discipleship focused person was like becoming an evangelist, you know, when they saw those numbers. And what was key is that obviously that's not sustainable. And so as you kind of see that kind of drop down, people get discouraged, and they think more about where they were at, not about what they've gained. And it should be you know, and this is why most people don't have the stomach for the stock market, because, you know, they're so worried about the ups and downs, so they're not thinking long-term. And so I think I would very much just say that as a starting point. We all felt that. But I would say for the engagement long-term, I do think and this just comes to, I think, some of the experience. One of the things that I say a lot is that the internet, in a weird way, democratized experience and wisdom. I could come to a table and have just as much experience or insight or wisdom, whatever you want to call it, than some of our senior leaders, because we've all grown up in the same age, where I would want to learn from some of the people older than me, but they are looking at me. And I've been in many of those meetings with, you know, my church and other people, and they're looking at me as the expert. And I'm like, oh man, I'm there. Okay, let's do it. Okay. And the key there is that I think people overprogram their experiences at church. They're trying to fill time. And there's a simple concept is that you got to go back to the bare basics of what you're trying to do. And so it's not getting a Zoom every night. It's trying to, obviously connect them to Jesus, but for your regular attenders and your members, you're trying to disciple them. And so, for example, one of the things that I've noticed with like our kids ministry at my church, at the end of COVID, once COVID started, we had kids small group, and two of my older kids are part of that. And they did Zoom. And you know what? I love that they tried it. But going into the next year, one of the things is that I was feeling is they're relying too much on Zoom. And so the point of having these kids Bible studies isn't to disciple them so many hours. It's just to disciple them. So if they're on all week on Zooms for school, then what you need to do, for example, is you need to actually maybe instead of meeting, 4 times a month on Zoom, you only meet 1 time, and then the other time you actually meet in person with some kind of drive-through interactive experience. And so it's about slimming down and about really getting nitty-gritty. But I think people need to have an honest conversation on what it is. And that's where you need the wisdom of like long-term pastors of what discipleship means, and then the experience of some of the digital experts where you're having real conversations, because I feel like a lot of churches just started to fill slots and think we need to keep people busy because they're just going to waste their time on Netflix or whatever. But I think we need to reevaluate everything and simplify it. But long-term, I actually think one of the things that I'm excited about, and some churches are doing this, some of us are still trying to figure out the technology pieces, but this is a moment where we should reevaluate what does engagement look like for our church long-term. And so one of the things that it did kind of shine a light on is that we were so dependent, our communication strategy was so dependent, and our discipleship pathway was so dependent on people being in the room and having room availability, where you should have a clear way. Every team at your church, every ministry, should have a way to do a digital expression of what they're doing. And so this is where it's reevaluating your job description. Your job is not to get people in the room and do the thing. Your job is to do the thing. And secondary, as an option, get them in a room. And so creating digital on-ramps, because that just showed that we weren't ready. And so I think this is where, having a solid website that does everything, having a solid app that's a one-stop shop that's connected to, and I'm going to use words that some of your people that probably don't know, CRMs, where you're managed with your database. And again, these are big visions. Like there's a lot to do here, but I think we should realize we were too reliant off of everybody showing up. And I think this shows that. And I think Dave, you have a great line on that I've kind of latched onto about, attendance isn't decreasing, it's decentralizing. I think that's so true with your church is decentralizing, and you need to be able to have the systems to support that. So that's a long way to answer that, but I think that's
good, Jay.
Very important.
And I think you just talked about CRMs or church management systems, whatever. Our building for a lot of us was the CMS. That's where we connected, we managed, we communicated. That was it. And we've got to stop thinking of our building being our CMS.
I love I was listening to Andy Stanley the other day talking about this, and the concept blew my mind. He said, up until now, the last 20 odd years we've been going as a church, we've been like Starbucks, serving up hot ministry to anybody who walks into our doors. Yeah. And COVID has completely changed that. In fact, we were going that way anyway. And he said, we've got to stop being baristas who are serving up hot ministry and start being missionaries again. And I thought, that he's nailed it. We've got to switch this idea of when they come to us, we can start helping them find Jesus and helping them follow Jesus. And we've got to go reach more people. And what better way to do that than use the online platform to do it?
So good.
Well, we hope this episode of Bricks and Clicks was helpful. If it was, then we'd love if you could leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you are leading a church in Australia, the UK, or Ireland, we'd love to help you grow your church by reaching unchurched people. Go to www.bricksandclickpodcast.com and click on your country's flag to find a whole bunch of free resources to help your church go further, faster, and become irresistible once again.